Hello, Props. We're back with another book, a Halloween-themed book, which I'm not going to read all of, but I will read a chapter or two, since it is broken up into, obviously, several stories. The Dracula book of great vampire stories, and leafing through the contents, I found that there's no rendition of this story, Dr. Franz Hartmann's An Authenticated Vampire Story. So we'll turn to that one. It's very brief, and since my phone is charging and I'm not reading my normal book, I will do this. An Authenticated Vampire Story by Franz Hartmann, 1838 to 1912. A true report by the famous occultist Dr. Franz Hartmann, with all the classic ingredients of vampire fiction: the lonely castle in the Carpathian Mountains, the portraits of a beautiful but sinister countess, a carriage with 2 black horses, and a malignant phantom, first published in the Occult Review, London, September 1909, bruv. Let me light a candle there. Make this even more ridiculous. All right, bruv, we got the old pumpkin candle going. Let's do it. In June 10th. Oh no. 1909, there appeared in a prominent, should be on June 10th. That's an I, right? I'm going to say on. I don't care what he says. On June 10th, 1909, there appeared in a prominent Vienna paper, the Neues Wiener Journal, a notice which I herewith enclose, saying that the castle of B. Bobcat had been burned by the populace because there was a great mortality among the peasant children, and it was generally believed that this was due to the invasion of a vampire, supposed to be the last Count Bobcat, who died and acquired that reputation. In case you weren't aware or can't read, Bobcat is not the proper name, it's just Count B. The castle was situated in a wild and desolate part of the Carpathian Mountains and was formerly a fortification against the Turks. It was not inhabited, owing to its being believed to be in the possession of ghosts. Only a wing of it was used as a dwelling for the caretaker and his wife. Now it so happened that when I read the above notice, I was sitting in a coffee house at Vienna in company with an old friend of mine, who is an inexperienced occultist and editor of a well-known journal, and who had spent several months in the neighborhood of the castle. From him I obtained the following account, and it appears that the vampire in question was probably not the old count, but his beautiful daughter, the Countess Elga, whose photograph, taken from the original painting, I obtained. My friend said, 2 years ago I was living at Hermannstadt, and being engaged in engineering a road through the hills, I often came in within the vicinity of the old castle, where I made the acquaintance of the old castellan, or caretaker, and his wife, who occupied a part of the wing of the house, almost separate from the main body of the building. They were a quiet old couple, and rather reticent in giving information or expressing an opinion in regard to the strange noises which were often heard at night in the deserted halls, or of the apparitions which the Wallachian peasants, or it's Wallachian actually, I should know that from the last book I read, The Making of a Vampire, the Wallachian peasants claimed to have seen when they loitered in the surroundings after dark. All I could gather was that the old count was a widower and had a beautiful daughter, who was one day killed by a fall from her horse, and that soon after the old man died in some mysterious manner, and the bodies were buried in a solitary graveyard belonging to a neighboring village. Not long after their death, an unusual mortality was noticed among the inhabitants of the village. Several children and even some grown people died without any apparent illness. They merely wasted away, and thus a rumor was started that the old count had become a vampire after his death. There is no doubt that he was not a saint, as he was addicted to drinking, and some shocking tales were in circulation about his conduct and that of his daughter, but whether or not there was any truth in them, I am not in a position to say. Afterwards, the property came into possession of a distant relative of the family, who is a young man, an officer in a cavalry regiment in Vienna. It appears that the heir enjoyed his life at the capital and did not trouble himself much about the old castle in the wilderness. He did not even come to look at it, but gave his direction by letter to the old janitor, telling him merely to keep things in order and to attend to repairs, if any were necessary. Thus, the castellan was actually master of the house and offered its hospitality to me and my friends. One evening, myself and my two assistants, Dr. E., a young lawyer, and Mr. W., a literary man, went to inspect the premises. First, we went to the stables. There were no horses, as they had been sold, but what attracted our special attention was an old queer-fashioned coach, with gilded ornaments and bearing the emblems of the family. We then inspected the rooms, passing through some halls and gloomy corridors, such as may be found in any old castle. There was nothing remarkable about the furniture, but in one of the halls there hung in a frame an old painting, a portrait representing a lady with a large hat and wearing a fur coat. We all were involuntarily startled on beholding this picture, not so much on account of the beauty of the lady, but on account of the uncanny expression of her eyes, and Dr. E., after looking at the picture for a short time, suddenly exclaimed, "How strange! The picture closes its eyes and opens them again, and now begins to smile." Now, Dr. E. is a very sensitive person and has more than once had some experience in spiritism, and we made up our minds to form a circle for the purpose of investigating this phenomenon. Accordingly, on the same evening, we sat around a table in an adjoining room, forming a magnetic chain with our hands. Soon the table began to move, and the name Elga was spelled. We asked who this Elga was, and the answer was rapped out. "The lady whose picture you have seen." "Is the lady living?" asked Mr. W. The question was not answered, but instead it was rapped out. "If W. desires it, I will appear to him bodily tonight at 2 o'clock. W. consented, and now the table seemed to be endowed with life, and manifested a great affection for W. It rose on two legs and pressed against his breast as if it intended to embrace him. We inquired of the castellan whom the picture represented, but to our surprise he did not know. He said that it was the copy of a picture painted by the celebrated painter Hans Marker of Vienna, and had been bought by the old count because its demoniacal look pleased him so much. We left the castle, and W. retired to his room at an inn, a half-hour's journey distant from that place. He was of a somewhat skeptical turn of mind, being neither a firm believer in ghosts and apparitions nor ready to deny their possibility. He was not afraid, but anxious to see what would come out of his agreement. And for the purpose of keeping himself awake, he sat down and began to write an article for a journal. Towards 2 o'clock, he heard steps on the stairs, and the door of the hall opened. There was a rustling of a silk dress and the sound of the feet of a lady walking to and fro in the corridor. It may be imagined that he was somewhat startled, but taking courage, he said to himself, "If this is Elga, let her come in." Then the door of his room opened, and Elga entered. She was most elegantly dressed and appeared still more youthful and seductive than the picture. There was a lounge on the other side of the table where W. was writing, and there she silently posed herself. She did not speak, but her looks and gestures left no doubt in regard to her desires and intentions. Mr. W. resisted the temptation and remained firm. It is not known whether he did so out of principle or timidity or fear. But be this as it may, he kept on writing, looking from time to time at his visitor and silently wishing that she would leave. At last, after half an hour, which seemed to him much longer, the lady departed in the same manner in which she came. This adventure left W no peace, and we consequently arranged several sittings at the old castle where a variety of uncanny phenomena took place. Thus, for instance, once the servant girl was about to light a fire in the stove when the door of the apartment opened, and Elga stood there. The girl, frightened out of her wits, rushed out of the room, tumbling down the stairs in terror with the petroleum lamp in her hand, which broke and came very near to setting her clothes on fire. Lighted lamps and candles went out when brought near the picture, and many other manifestations took place, which it would be tedious to describe, but the following incident ought not be omitted. Mr. W. was at that time desirous of obtaining the position as co-editor of a certain journal, and a few days after the above narrated adventure, he received a letter in which a noble lady of high position offered him her patronage for that purpose. The writer requested him to come to a certain place the same evening, where he would meet a gentleman who would give him further particulars. He went and was met by an unknown stranger, who told him that he was requested by the Countess Elga to invite Mr. W. to a carriage drive, and that she would await him at midnight at a certain crossing of two roads not far from the village. The stranger then suddenly disappeared. Now it seems that Mr. W. had some misgivings about the meeting and drive, and he hired a policeman as detective to go at midnight to the appointed place. To see what would happen, the policeman went and reported next morning that he had seen nothing but the well-known old-fashioned carriage from the castle with two black horses attached to it, standing there as if waiting for somebody, and that he had no occasion to interfere and merely waited until the carriage moved on. When the castellan of the castle was asked, he swore that the carriage had not been out that night, and in fact it could not have been out, as there were no horses to draw it. But that is not all, for on the following day I met a friend who is a great skeptic and disbeliever in ghosts, and always used to laugh at such things. Now, however, he seemed to be very serious and said, "Last night something very strange happened to me. At about 1 o'clock this morning, I returned from a late visit, and as I happened to pass the graveyard of the village, I saw a carriage with gilded ornaments standing at the entrance. I wondered about this taking place at such an unusual hour, and being curious to see what would happen, I waited. Two elegantly dressed ladies issued from the carriage. One of these was young and pretty, but threw at me a devilish and scornful look as they both passed by and entered the cemetery. There they were met by a well-dressed man, who saluted the ladies and spoke to the younger one, saying, "Why, Miss Elga, are you returned so soon?" Such a queer feeling came over me that I abruptly left and hurried home. This matter has not been explained, but certain experiments which we subsequently made with the picture of Elga brought out some curious facts. To look at the picture for a certain time caused me to feel a very disagreeable sensation in the region of the solar plexus. I began to dislike the portrait and proposed to destroy it. We held a sitting in the adjoining room. The table manifested a great aversion against my presence. It was rapped out that I should leave the circle and that the picture must not be destroyed. I ordered a Bible to be brought in and read the beginning of the first chapter of St. John, whereupon the above-mentioned Mr. E., the medium, and another man present claimed that they saw the picture distorting its face. I turned the frame and pricked the back of the picture with my penknife in different places, and Mr. E., as well as the other man, felt all the pricks, although they had retired to the corridor. I made the sign of the pentagram over the picture, and again the two gentlemen claimed that the picture was horribly distorting its face. Soon afterwards we were called away and left that country. Of Elga I heard nothing more. Thus far goes the account of my friend the editor. There are several points of it which call for an explanation. Perhaps the sages of the SPR will find it by investigating the laws of nature ruling the astral plane, unless they prefer to take the easier route by proclaiming it all to be humbug and fraud. All right, well, that wasn't very vampirish, but that is it. 14 and a half minuets. The Dracula Book of Great Vampire Stories. We could have made a better cover, honestly, than what looks like coagulated something on blood. Of course, I'm colorblind, so it looks like brown or green. Although I can clearly see it is red. All right, Bob, that's all. Goodbye.